And welcome to the Fearless Perspectives podcast with your host, Kevin Jordan Campbell. Kevin, how are you? Good to see you.
Great. How are you doing, Bill?
I'm good. For those of you who've heard a few episodes, this might be interesting to you because we're going to tackle the idea of being fearless today. And this is an obvious question, Kevin, because I think it's pretty clear why there's so much misunderstanding around the phrase and the word. But why do you think the word fearless gets so commonly misunderstood?
In the context of financial planning, it's we had some challenges with that originally. And the whole title comes back to the whole concept behind the fearless perspectives and the fearless ecosystem. All comes back to my book, which actually just released. This is actually the first copy hot off the press.
Sweet.
Of Fearless. And the idea behind it was that people are so afraid around money. They have constant fear around investing and about financial security. And so when we started coming up with the concept of Fearless, it was around the idea behind fearless doesn't mean reckless, right? And that's a really big point to understand. When people hear fearless, sometimes they go, "Oh, we're being reckless." No, we're not being reckless. The word fearless is about being prepared for what comes and managing risk. Our practice, and as we teach about finances, is very heavily focused on risk control and risk mitigation, minimizing risk as much as you can. And I'll give you a couple of analogies here to it, as we all take risk. I think we talked about this briefly in one of the other episodes. We take risks every day. Every day you get in your car, you take a risk. But what you do is you manage that risk as best you can, right? But once you get into your car and you buy a safe car, you drive it, you keep it maintained, you do everything you can to mitigate risk, you don't generally run down the road shaking, scared to death. Now there might be days that are worse than others, right? You almost get into an accident or something like that. But the idea behind fearless is about preparation. It's about making sure that when you do something that in your financial world, that you're mitigating as much risk as you can. And that is, and I'm a very true believer in the idea that if you manage the risk, the returns will almost, maybe not quite, they will almost take care of themselves, because investing is about risk management.
No, I like your choice of fearless because and I understand why it gets confused, and I think I've misunderstood a lot because most people, when they sit down with a financial advisor, the financial advisor does not say, "How fearless are you?" They say, "What's your appetite for risk?"
Yeah. How scared are you?
Yeah. How scared are you, as a matter of fact, right? So how does your approach, being prepared, make it different from what a lot of people think the stock market or any market is, as a matter of fact, basically gambling?
Right. So great question. So the idea behind preparation, again, goes back to risk control. We do everything we can to manage risk. And so that also means, one, it means making good investments, but two, it also means managing investments properly. I talk about this quite a bit as I'm a big fan of, personally, of active management. And the reason, particularly a couple of different styles of active management. Most commonly, what I'm a fan of are typically things that are referred to as trending. And so we're not day trading by any means. And I want you to get the idea that this is day trading kind of stuff.
Okay.
But what it is looking at what's going on in the market. Frankly, it's what everybody thinks their financial advisors are doing, that most of them are not. Because most portfolios are passive, or if they are, or they might have some slight activity to them. But what they're typically not doing is looking at, hey, what's going on in the market right now, and do I need to make defensive strategies, or do I need to deploy defensive strategies? Right? Do I need to get more defensive in the portfolio? Do I need to make a shift? And again, we're not talking about reactionary. We're not talking about somebody's gut. We're talking about data-based, formulaic, looking at what's going on in the markets and where do we need to be. There are a couple different ways you can invest. You can invest based on what always has been, like, hey, this was always a great stock, right? Amazon's great. So there's a lot of great stocks. Amazon's a great stock. There's been a lot of great stocks. But if you look back, there's, hey, at one point, Blockbuster was awesome.
Ironically, yes.
Right. And there's a ton. And there's still some big names out there that are still around, but their heyday isn't what it used to be. Doesn't mean they're gone. And then again, also, if you look at, for example, the S&P 500 and look at the top companies in the S&P 500, and then go back and look at what it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 20 years ago, it's an entirely different list. Right. So just because a company is a monster doesn't mean it's always going to be. So you want to look at, that's the kind of the what is. Hey, we're going to buy XYZ because it's always been a great stock. Well, maybe it does continue to be a great stock. Maybe it doesn't. And there are times, and we've seen this many times over the years, where people probably should have exited a stock a long time ago. They still made money. They still did okay, but they weren't optimized. They didn't optimize their situation. So you can trade, you can invest based on what has always been, the past, using the rearview mirror. You can invest on what you think might happen, right? Which is that's the speculative side. That's the, hey, I'm going to buy, whatever it is. Pick your meme stock or your Bitcoin or your GameStop or whatever it is where you're trying to capture the next Amazon while it's still in somebody's garage, or the next Microsoft while it's still in somebody's garage. So you're based on what you hope could be. Or we look through the windshield and look at what's coming right now, what's happening right now, and in the markets, and making adjustments based upon what's occurring right now. Not speculation, not history, but what's occurring right now. That's the kind of investing that I'm a fan of. And that's when you're prepared for that, you're not taking gambles on what has been and on what doesn't mean that, it's still the market, right? And the market is the market, and it does what it wants to do. And it doesn't always make sense. As a matter of fact, these days, especially, it quite frequently makes zero sense. It does absolutely the opposite of what it should in some cases. So, but it's being prepared for those things and being able to be, I think another way of thinking about it is nimble, being nimble where you can move more easily to adjust to current conditions.
In the process of being nimble, where does the planning come in that gives you the confidence, or what role does planning play in that kind of market environment that gives you and your client's confidence?
There's a couple of things. First, we were talking about investing just a minute ago. Now, if we talk about planning, that's a whole different concept. The investment is obviously part of the plan, but having a financial plan where you've run the numbers out and you know what your targets are, you know what kind of rates of return you need to achieve in order for your plan to hold together.
Okay.
You know how your income is coming in, you're tax efficient. There's when it comes to parts of a plan, the things that we see swing the needle the most are an income plan. How are we going to take what we have created over our entire lifetimes, all of the resources we've built? How do we take that and turn that into an income plan? How do we convert it to income? How do we do that as tax efficiently as we can so that we don't end up overpaying taxes? And a tremendous amount of people are overpaying taxes in retirement. An investment plan. How are we going to, and that's where we just talked about those kind of investment strategies where we are trying to be as nimble as we can. And if you have a plan put together where you know where your income's coming from, you know how your taxes are playing out, and then your investment strategy, you start understanding how much risk you can absorb and how much fluctuation you can absorb. So, and as long as once we define all of these things within a plan, what we often look at, for example, when we're meeting with people that we've done financial planning for, and we know we've got a very good idea of where they're at realistically for the next decade or so financially, we can understand what those parameters are as far as how far can this go before it breaks. And when you're in that situation where you understand, I have a plan, here's how much fluctuation my plan can absorb, then as long as you're within that fluctuation, we look at it all the time with a client. Like, for example, if we're meeting with a client that, quarterly meeting or something like that, the first thing we look at is the plan still holding together? Are we still hitting the goals? Are we still hitting the targets? And if we are, we don't have to worry about the volatility in the markets right now. It doesn't mean it's not relevant, right? It's still relevant, but as long as the big question, are we still on track? Are we still on target for our financial goals? And are we still within the design parameters of where we need to be in order to achieve our goals, even with the current fluctuations? And if the answer is yes, then we're good.
That's interesting. Yeah.
It just gives you confidence, right? When you know what your plan is, it's like if you don't have, and that's the problem is most people just don't have a plan. One, they don't have a financial plan. And by the way, just like, hey, I'm investing money in my 401k. That's not a financial plan. I'm saving money in an investment account, right? And so that's not a plan. If you have a documented financial plan that gives you a roadmap into the future, as long as you're still on track for that, you're good. And that kind of thing it gives you confidence in the fact that we know where we're going. I'll use the analogy of like a road trip, right? If we're doing a road trip across the United States, and hey, we run into a storm, it starts snowing in the Rockies. We know that we have X amount of time to make our trip. We know we're still on target. It's like, okay, well, we've got a little snowstorm. It's going to slow us down a little bit, but we're going to be out of the snowstorm here in the next 20 miles. We'll be fine, right? Nothing to worry about. So, but it's when you have that plan, you know how much deviation you can absorb and how much risk you can absorb. How many changes to the plan can you absorb before it breaks?
Yeah. And I would imagine having that plan makes sense of how, in fact, fear and caution can exist side by side with each other, because they can within the context of a plan and knowing where you're going, right?
Absolutely. Again, fearless doesn't mean reckless. Actually, in my mind, in so many things that you would think of as risky, everything from where we've used the conversation before about driving cars, anything where people absorb risk. Let's talk about extreme sports or military operations or things like that. Those are all risky things, right? Let's skydiving. There's so many things, but people spend what you do is if you're doing something that has a higher level of risk, you spend a lot of time planning for contingency and making sure that things are set the way they're supposed to be. You wouldn't just walk up, throw a parachute on and go jump out of an airplane with no idea what you're doing, right? At least I wouldn't.
No, I wouldn't either. And I actually would like to go skydiving, having never done it before. But the last thing I would do would be to jump out of a plane when I showed up at somebody's hangar and they said, here, throw this on. We're going to jump out.
You have no idea how it operates. You have nothing about it. You've done zero risk mitigation in that situation, right? So, ironically, funny story. I was at an airport recently and there was a bunch of skydivers coming in, and then we saw them all grab their chutes and jump on this trailer to get driven back to the hangar that they'd been at. And the funny thing is, me and the guy with me were watching all the people go by. That is a bunch of gray hairs, right? It was all people that looked like you and I, right? It wasn't like 20-something adventure seekers.
Yes, well, of course.
It was 50 and 60-year-olds going, yeah, that was awesome, right? So, but anyways, the point being is that you're always trying to mitigate risk. And so when you do something, let's use military operations, for example. When you're doing anything that has risk, police operations, military operations, anytime people are taking risk, they're spending a tremendous amount of time planning and preparing so that they know there's a plan A, B, and C. And that's something that goes along with this financial planning as well. It's not just having the plan, it's having plan A, B, and C. And sometimes plan D. And it's like, if X happens, we're going to shift here. If this happens, we're going to shift here. We already know what the contingency plans are.
100%.
If the markets do this, we're doing this. If they then do this, we're doing this. And having that documented plan to execute. It's caution allows you, the caution and preparation is what allows you to be fearless.
Absolutely. Absolutely, as a matter of fact. In fact, in that context, when you manage the fear, I don't want to say when you take the fear out, because I think you manage fear. Decisions become easier, right? Because you have a perspective and you have a point of view from which to make decisions. Absolutely.
So when you're making decisions, it is much easier to make decisions when you're managing the fear. Because people think more clearly when they're not responding from fear. So you're able to think more clearly, you're able to evaluate more situations, you're able to evaluate more options rather than reacting just out of fear. If you don't have a plan, if you haven't done the prep work, then fear is going to take over. And I think it's interesting how many places in life this is true. right? We're here talking about finances. We've just talked about driving cars and military, jumping out of airplanes, and all kinds of stuff. Fear controls many people's lives. It really does. And understanding what you can do to mitigate risk makes, and once you execute that and have removed as much risk as you can, it makes it much easier to make a decision. Let's say, let's drop this into financials. If I am about to retire, or let's say I just retired, but let's run a scenario here. It's 2008. Right? Or let's say 2007.
That would be a bad time.
It's October. Let's see, September of 2007. And you have just retired, right? And you're like, oh, this is awesome. I'm retired. You know what? We're going to go spend this entire fall traveling Europe, traveling France. And then we're going to take out 6 months and go travel the world, or a year and go travel the world. And then November hits, December hits, what is now known as the Great Recession kicks in, and you watch a long fingernails on the chalkboard drawdown of your assets. Right, you see your assets get literally cut in half. Now, in that situation, if you had before you retired done the planning, you had created an income plan, a tax plan, and an investment plan. You had a plan for how you're going to weather storms in retirement. You're probably going to be okay. Most people didn't. And a lot of people did, right? So think about how bad that was, retiring into that environment.
I was covering finances during that period, as a matter of fact. So, I mean, I'm deeply aware of exactly the drama and the fear, the real genuine fear that was in the markets and in the economy. Absolutely.
So if you had done the planning and putting all the pieces in place, now I'm not saying it was no big deal. 2008 was 2000. It's what everybody calls it 2008. It was actually 2007 through 2009. Had you done the planning, you would have had confidence in your plan and gone, okay, we're taking a little bit of a hit here, but we're still going to be fine. If you had done all of the planning that we've outlined, income planning, tax planning, risk investment planning, all that. If you'd done all the strategies, if you laid everything out, you're probably going to be in pretty good shape. If you hadn't, you are controlled by fear. One, what's happening to the Europe trip? Well, it's done, right? Because you're getting controlled by fear. So you're not going to Europe. You're not going to deplete your assets in a down market. And now you are scared. And what happened to a lot of people too, and you probably covered this a lot back in that era too, what a lot of people did, they panicked, they sold at the bottom. Then they got super defensive and said, I just can't take risk. I can't go through that again. And they shifted their money into super conservative assets like CDs and stuff like that. And then they missed one of the biggest market runs in history.
Yeah.
Now they're facing retirement. And this is for people who weren't retiring then. This is for people who were in their 40s or 50s at that period, back in that era. But they watched a huge chunk of their wealth evaporate, got super conservative, missed the biggest run in market history, and are now going to struggle to retire because they let fear control them, because they got scared, they didn't create a plan, and fear controlled them, and fear won.
Yeah. And I do remember that time. And yes, it's true. That is true. But before we wrap this episode up, Kevin, if you had been prepared, I just don't even in this scenario, I don't even know, and so I'm going to give you a chance to answer this. I don't even know how being prepared at that point would have been okay for you. I would imagine having a financial advisor like yourself saying, "Don't worry, we do have a plan, and we can cope with this, and we have a way of dealing with option C here."
What ended up happening to a lot of people is a lot of people's financial advisors did tell them that, unfortunately. And I'm not saying it was wrong, but many of the financial advisors also hadn't. Defensive planning is not what a lot of people do. Most people do offensive planning. I remember a guy years ago. I knew there was another guy who was an advisor, and the funny thing was he didn't know that I was an advisor as well. because he talked about it all the time. I just knew him socially. He never once asked me what I did or anything like that. So we never talked about that.
That's great.
So he's sitting around and I'm like, hey, his name was Alex. I'm like, Alex, how the market's doing? He's like, oh, they're awesome. It's a great time to buy. It was always a great time to buy when you talk to Alex. Right? It was always a great time to buy. He was a total, bull market guy. Always believed that everything's going to go up. When they go down, just ride it out. And by the way, that's not wrong advice, right? You don't, but there is, in my opinion,
there's a different option,
right? There's different options where it's more optimized, right? You can buy and hold. There's nothing wrong with buy and hold. And it's completely true that over long periods of time, buy and hold works well. The problem is it depends on what your time window is. And can you optimize that more with more modern strategies? And I believe the answer to that is yes. So what happened back in that era was if you had done things like, again, creating income, if you had an income strategy that wasn't tied to the market, for example, or wasn't exactly dependent upon the market. So think about this. People who had pensions, if they were living on primarily pensions and Social Security in 2008, they were like, wow, that's a bummer.
True.
But it didn't really change their lives, right? Because they had a strong income plan. So if you have a strong income plan, then the investment plan can flux, right, with the markets. But if you don't have that income plan and you're relying, and this is what it's very common now, because again, keep in mind, pensions have gone the way of the dodo bird, right? For the most part, very few people have pensions these days, unless you're a government employee of some sort, or lucky enough to have worked for a company that had a pension that's still there. Most people's pensions it's just not a thing anymore for most people. So that is a huge risk exposure that most people just really haven't calculated and that they don't understand. So the idea back then, people's advisors were saying, hey, stay in, you're fine, which was probably decent advice at the same time. But had you, think about to that era again, had you had the ability to sidestep some of the down market and then re-enter the market at appropriate times based on, not on gut, but on data, you could have fared far better than the other direction. And again, and the bigger factor is it takes that gut-wrenching plunge. It makes it a lot easier, because it's a lot lower, right? And by the way, any of these things I'm talking about, and we're not getting into, obviously, we're not talking about product-specific things or anything like that. We're talking conceptually. But if you can try to minimize some of the losses, not eliminate, but minimize some of the losses and maximize the gains, well, gosh, but again, what we're doing is what everybody thinks their advisors are doing, which most just aren't. Many are just passive investing.
It is 100% true. I think a lot of people think that when they think of what happens inside financial planning in that back office, they think people are making adjustments. They think people are saying, well, the market shifted here. We need to do these things and we need to do that. And what you're talking about is, no, actually it's not. And we're going to be transparent about it. We're going to talk to you about it. We're going to be clear with you about it so you understand what's going on in the market and you understand where we are and you understand where we are within the context of a plan.
Context of a plan is the major keywords right there. An investment plan. Now, if you're 20, you don't need in my opinion, you're probably a little early for a financial plan. If you're 30, you're probably a little early. It's great to have goals and it's great to be on a trajectory, but you don't need the whole plan around it. You start getting a little patina on you like we have.
It's good. I like the way patina looks. I like that. It's good. Anyway.
It's something that becomes very important is understanding the plan, not just in an investment, a 401k, an IRA, a Roth, however, SEP, whatever you're investing is not a plan. It's an asset. It's an investment, right? Understanding how that investment operates within the context of your plan is critical. And that plan is what gives you the confidence to be fearless.
And so for people who are listening to this podcast who are thinking, this is an interesting conversation and this is a guy I'd like to talk to, how can they reach out to you, Kevin? And what's the best way for them to do that?
Probably the easiest way is the Peaks Financial website, peaksfinancial.com. There's a contact us form on there and they can reach out. That's probably the easiest way to reach out to us.
Yeah. And remember, reaching out to Kevin and having a conversation with him does not obligate you to anything. It gets you in a conversation with somebody, and the two of you can make a decision about whether you're fit for each other, whether you like working with each other or not. But you won't know that unless you reach out. So do it. Just, reach out and have that initial conversation. It's going to cost you nothing. Do it. And the other thing I'd ask is, if you're not a subscriber, hit the follow button. Become a subscriber, because by being a subscriber, every time a new episode drops, you're notified. You can give it a listen, as you will want to do, as a matter of fact. So until next time, I'm Bill Tucker. On behalf of Kevin and everybody at Peaks Financial, thank you for taking the time to listen today. And remember, go out there, be fearless, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening to Fearless Perspectives. If you found today's conversation helpful, follow the show so that you're notified when new episodes are released. You can also visit us at www.peaksfinancial.com or call us at 360-564-1811 to learn more about our approach. And remember, being fearless doesn't mean ignoring risk. It means being prepared, informed, and confident in the plan you've built. Any opinions are those of Peaks Financial and not necessarily those of Raymond James. Expressions of opinion are as of this date and are subject to change without notice. There is no guarantee that these statements, opinions, or forecasts provided herein will prove to be correct. The information contained in this report does not purport to be a complete description of the securities, markets, or developments referred to in this material. The foregoing information has been obtained from sources considered to be reliable, but we do not guarantee that it is accurate or complete. It is not a statement of all available data necessary for making an investment decision, and it does not constitute a recommendation. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Investing involves risk, and you may incur a profit or a loss regardless of strategy selected, including asset allocation and diversification. Raymond James is not affiliated with and does not endorse the opinions or services of any organizations or guest speakers mentioned herein. Investment advisory services offered through Raymond James Financial Services Advisors, Inc. Peaks Financial is separately owned and operated and not independently registered as an investment advisor.